particular issue that we get a lot of calls on, and then we will open it up for unlimited questions that people have. So on the second slide, for those that are new to these Q&A sessions, tells you a little bit about how you can either sort of raise your hand to be recognized so we can have you ask a question orally, or if you want to send in an email. So on slide 2, you can follow along with those instructions. So let's pass through that. We'll go to slide 3. So we're going to talk for the next 5 or 10 minutes a little bit about portfolio conversions and multi-phase conversions. These are two of the new sort of incentives or sweeteners that we added with the revised notice in early July. And so we'll cover a little bit of territory. So on slide 3, where it talks about portfolio conversions, that the first bullet is that a PHA defines what it calls as a portfolio. If I'm a PHA that has 10 projects, my portfolio might be all my 10 projects, or you may decide it's some other subset of my 10. Maybe it's just 6 or 5, or whatever it is. So you define what you consider your portfolio. You have to give us an application for half of those projects. It's half of the projects, not half of the units. So if it turns out that the half that you choose are less than 50% of the units, that's fine with us. We don't. That's appropriate. So for the half that you submit, we will set aside an award for the remaining units in your portfolio, and then you have 365 days from the day of your award to get us the remaining units, applications for remaining projects. And this is intended for PHAs that really need more time to work with their boards, work with their resident councils, just do other sort of feasibility planning, and but want to go deep, want to go big in terms of submitting, and therefore know that if they at least submit the first set of applications, there's a CHAP award for them once they finish their work on the remaining applications. And then, like the multi-phase awards, what's also very nice about this little feature is that even though you may be submitting applications for half of your portfolio in 2014, we're still giving you the benefit of those 2012 rent levels, so you can still lock in now at those amounts. So on the next slide, I've created a simple little chart that tries to sort of show what a PHA might be doing. So here the PHA has 6 projects with a total of 365 units. On the first column on the far left says the PIC development number. PIC is, for those not in public housing, the Public Housing Information Center. It's sort of our basic database that we maintain on housing authorities. So in PIC, presumably you might have 6 projects, and they're numbered 1 through 6. The first project being project 4 on the sheet. So we've got the PIC development number, the name, the units to be converted, and then what's showing here is that the projects 4, 2, and 1 are coming in the first application, and shows roughly the estimated capital needs for the project and how much per unit and what the financing source is. But then what the PHA is doing is giving itself a little bit more time to submit applications for 6, 3, and 5. And in this particular example, the number of units in the second half of the portfolio actually exceed the number of units in the first portfolio. It's okay. As long as you're giving us applications for 3 of your 6, then we'll reserve your CHAP authority for the remaining units. Okay? So let's go to the next concept, which is the multi-phase conversions. And this is similar to portfolio, except it's on a project level. And it's an acknowledgement that there's a lot of public housing that's going to take several years to build out and to sort of raise the type of capital you might need. You may have a large downtown family site that just is simply impractical to get the tax credits that you might need in one allocation. You might need several years. So as long as you give us an application for the first phase, and then the only real requirement after that is that you give us the last phase or the remaining phases by July 1st, 2015. You're still required to meet all CHAP milestones for once you get the award for whatever phase, that those phases are subject to our CHAP milestones, CHAP being the commitment to enter into a housing assistance payment contract, essentially our award letter. And then like the portfolio awards, that you're locking in at the 2012 rent levels, even though you may not be giving us an application for some phases until July 1st, 2015. So if you go to the next slide, which is slide 6, we've just tried to construct a little example here. So if you don't mind, I'll sort of read it as we go along. The Brockport Housing Authority is submitting a multi-phase application for its first AMP, 001, Washington Gardens. The project consists of 250 units, and the PHA is planning to redevelop this in 3 phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, 50, 100, and 100. So the application for this final phase, they're going to be allowed to wait until 7/1/15. And sort of what the PHA is sort of saying here is, assuming HUD turns around my application that I submit on 7/1/15 in 30 days, then HUD will give the PHA an award by 8/1/15. Then under RAD, anyone who's doing either 4% credits or 9% credits, you have a 90-day grace period after we give you an award to submit a tax credit application for the next funding round in your state. If it's a 9% credit, it's whatever that next funding round is, 90 days after award, which might be 3 months away, 6, 9, 12 months away, whatever that is, you're expected to submit by then. If it is a 4% tax credit that you're going after, and in many states they just have sort of an open period, then it might be by day 91 you're supposed to submit, unless the state has sometimes they call a registration round for 4% credits, then you'd wait for whenever that registration round date is. But in this particular example, we assumed that the PHA sort of in that state, after they made the award to the PHA for their CHAP on 8/1/15, that they really couldn't submit until April of 2016. Therefore, they would submit to the state for their tax credits on April 1, 2016, assume the state takes 3 months to make an award, so by July 1 they've been awarded, and then the PHA would give us our financing plan for that final phase 2 months later, September 1, 2016. So, and in the chart below, this sort of shows the initial phase and the remaining 2 phases, when they would submit the application, when they think they would get their submit the tax credit application, and when they'd give to us our financing plan submission. And so when PHAs have a multi-phase project, although we haven't put it on our website yet, we're going to make available to you a template or a sort of a suggested Excel spreadsheet that would essentially contain very much what you see on this sheet right here. Is we'd ask you to do it, to submit us, so it explains to us what the key sort of steps are in terms of the phases. When you're going to give us the application, when is the LIHTC application, and therefore roughly when would the financing plan be. And those would be the key elements that we would want from you if you were giving us a multi-phase award. So that's a quick overview in both the portfolio awards and the multi-phase applications. So what I'm going to do is, before we open up to other broader questions, I think the first thing we'll do on the call today is just see if anybody has any questions related to portfolio awards or multi-phase awards. So we're going to look to see if there's any hands up. So we've got one. So Gary Foster, Gary, you've got a question?
Yes, Will. Gastonia Housing Authority has 3 amps with 2 projects in 1 amp. To meet the 50% rule, would we need to submit 2 of the amps, or could we submit the 1 amp with the 2 projects and meet the 50% rule?
Okay, so I'm sorry to walk it through me again. Give me the scenario.
Okay, we got 3 amps.
3 amps today. Yep.
Yep, and one of those amps has 2 projects in it.
Yep.
2 distinct properties.
Right.
Although they're very close together.
Yep.
If we submitted those 2 projects as although it's 1 amp, would that meet our 50% rule?
Yes, it would, because if you're breaking out that first amp into really two transactions, and in which there would be two separate financing plans. So, so yes, we would treat those two separate transactions for the purposes of the portfolio award. Is ultimately you're giving us looking to 4 applications, and so you've met the criteria for the portfolio award.
Thank you.
Good. I'm going to go next to just go down. Hold on. Anybody else? We got some written questions. We're going to look at that.
Here we go. So we've got one from Holly Knight. Can you submit a portfolio application with a multi-phase for one of the amps?
Yes, you can combine. There's nothing prohibiting you from combining. So you can, yes, do a portfolio, and one of the portfolios could be a multi-phase project. Thanks, Holly.
And that's the only one related to portfolio or multi-phase.
Okay. Anybody else have anything, question right now on multi-phase or portfolio awards? I'm just going to look at the screen one more time. Yep. So Tom Davis. Tom, go ahead.
So in a dealing with a scenario with a multi-phase transaction where the AMP includes some single-family and duplex houses that are off-site, that okay. In the context of the multi-phase transaction, those RAD units will ultimately get transferred to the on-site development.
Okay.
And then those units will get sold. Is there a timing? I'm wondering about the timing with respect to the transfers of the RAD. Can the off-site units be sold with the first phase, even if their reconstruction is with the second phase, or how does the reappearance of the units in the new second phase development work with a sale of off-site units?
I'm just going to talk, think, and talk at the same time. So bear with me. I may amend it once my words get out of my mouth. Sure. So one of the challenges we have under RAD is that it's also a preservation program, and so we want people to, if you've got a 100-unit project, unless those units qualify under as one of our exceptions, we want 100 units back, and we also want to make sure that when you move forward, we're certain that in fact the units are going to be replaced. So is what you're asking, Tom, is can I sell some units in a second phase for which I've not submitted a financing plan to help with the first phase?
I guess that would be one way to describe it.
Yeah, and I think with it would have to be generally no. We would have to be something extraordinary that you'd be sort of making a good case, because we could never be sure that until you give us the financing plan on the second phase, that in fact the second phase is going to pencil out, and so therefore we might be left somewhat holding the bag. And yeah, we want sort of each phase as much as possible to be a standalone where we can say, yes, this is what you've asked to do, and you can show us that you've got the financing to back it up. So that's why we'd be hesitant to accelerate some approval for something that's further down the road without knowing whether the rest of that transaction is ever going to make it.
Okay.
All right. So there may be, with that as a very broad statement, it might be there's some, as you go back to the drawing board with the PHA you're working with, that there may be something you could propose to us that we could find another way to solve it. But that, just to understand what our concern is.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. We've got another written one.
From Suzanne, she asked, do you have to submit a separate application for each project if you have several projects in each AMP?
No. So it all depends on, so AMPs are this funny acronym, Asset Management Project, where PHAs were asked 7 years ago to look at their inventories and put them into what was supposed to be manageable entities. And we found out that obviously a lot of PHAs today look back at their amps and say, well, now given RAD, I'd like to break some of that up. So it depends on what you're trying to do out the, when it's all said and done. If you have a particular amp of 300 units and you really want to keep that 300 units as one financing entity, then and management entity, then no, you don't need to give us anything, even though they may be different buildings. But if you're really trying to break it up and you're going to have a different financing structure for any piece of that 300-unit current amp, then we do ask for an application for each component. So if I've got a 300-unit amp and 100 units of them is a high-rise building, sort of on one end of the neighborhood, and then there's 200 family units a mile away, I really am going to do two separate 4% transactions, one for the high-rise and the other for the family. Then those would be we would ask you to do two applications because it really is two separate financings. So hope that helps.
And we have another written question. This is about portfolio awards for mod rehab projects. If they have 3 mod rehab projects with different ownership entities, but the same GP involved in all 3, could they submit a portfolio?
Yes, they could do a portfolio. As long as the commonality of the GP, they could do that.
That's our last one.
No other? Okay, so we seem to have exhausted on the written and oral questions from at least the portfolio awards and the multi-phase awards. I will open it up to see if there's any other sort of items on the that people want to talk about today as they've been working through any of their applications. Not limited to anything.
So we've got a written one from Holly Knight again.
Good, thanks, Holly.
She asked, can a PHA continue to have a PHA Housing Authority board, since under state law they would still be chartered even if all of the properties are converted to RAD?
Right. So a lot of people say, what does it mean for a PHA that if I convert all of my public housing, does the Housing Authority go away? In some sense, it's up to you as the PHA. We remember that under RAD, when it comes to ownership, what we say is, who can own the properties after a property is converted? A PHA can continue to own it either under its existing umbrella, as a subsidiary, a nonprofit, an affiliate, a nonprofit affiliate of it. It can give it to any other nonprofit, give it to any other public body. It can do any one of those, or it can sell it or turn it over to a tax credit partnership or for-profit in order to raise tax credits. So a PHA, but most PHAs are going to want to, or likely going to want to still hold on to the property, probably though through a nonprofit affiliate of some sort. And so therefore their board would still continue. The board would still be responsible for this asset, but not under the public housing program, sort of indirectly through the nonprofit and then through the Section 8 program. So the board continues. It just has a different way in which the subsidies are provided to this particular project. So I often say in speeches I make is that the mission and the role of the board really doesn't change. It's just that they've now placed the asset on a different foundation than it was before. So housing authorities would in most cases, the PHA would continue to own it, but just through a nonprofit. But it's really up to the PHA to decide if it still wants to do that. It certainly could decide if it didn't want to be in the business of owning and managing housing anymore. It could use the authority under RAD to transfer it to some other PHA or to some other nonprofit or public body if it chose to do that. Thanks, Holly.
There's another written question from Ada Lopez. He asked, can a public housing authority use public housing reserves for pre-development expenses for approved RAD projects? Right.
So this issue of when can I use public housing money and how much can I use it for? So it depends on whether you've reached the point of closing, or it's sort of pre-closing or pre-development expenses. So yes, you can use public housing funds for eligible pre-development expenses, prior to closing. Our deal is, well, for every project, if you use those, there's a first $100,000, which you don't have to ask HUD for any approval to spend the money. But in spending that money, you still have to use public housing procurement rules because it's still public housing money. So you can use it for the project. You can use reserves, capital funds, operating subsidies for a project, and you don't need anyone from HUD's approval to spend up to $100,000 in any pre-development by project. But because they're public housing funds, when you use those funds, you still have to use public housing procurement rules, which in most cases is small purchase procedures, which is pretty streamlined and simple. And so if you need to hire a development consultant or an architect or an engineer, then you don't have to go out and do formal bids. You can simply generally just get 3 firms, ask them to give you quotes, and you can make some decisions on it. So that's if you are trying to spend it sort of prior to closing. If you are not spending it, but just really want to make it part of the deal, part of the development budget, in which case we approve your financing plan, and then at closing, then you don't have to follow public housing procurement rules. Once you close on the project and you've identified, I'm putting in $500,000 of my reserves towards this particular project, we don't impose any procurement rule once you close. It's just prior to closing, until we really know you've got a live deal, that at least you have to follow public housing rules in spending those pre-development expenses. So, Ada, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, just raise your hand again.
Maria Marquez.
Maria, go ahead with your question.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
This is Chuck Valentine, Director of MOD at the Camden Housing Authority.
Okay, hello, Chuck.
Hi. Obviously, when you convert to project-based, there's no more capital funds. If it's a mixed finance deal, does HUD set forth a capital replacement reserve requirement in order to at least equal what we used to receive in capital funds in order to help maintain the project long-term?
So you're converting this, whatever project it is, to RAD. RAD does not impose any reserve requirements per se. When you just help me out here, is it a new construction or is it rehab?
Let's say new construction, 9% mixed finance, new construction, or no, let's say rehab of an existing building, because that's more likely what we would do.
Okay, so you're going to do a rehab of an existing building. As a result, that we're going to require you to do a physical condition assessment once you get an award that is due within 90 days. And that physical condition assessment will say you've got X amount of immediate repairs you have to do, and you'll have to make sure you take care of them. But the physical condition assessment will also dictate or say to you, here's how much you need to set aside every month to pay for the windows that really got another 15 years in them, or to repaint the property in 12 years, whatever. So the PCA provider will set aside or size a replacement reserve amount for you. So you'll have to put that aside and put it into your pro forma. But
so it does, in essence, it does then set some standard for how much you should put in reserve in order to maintain the property over time.
Yeah, except that there's no artificial standard, right? It's just, it really is.
So it's based on the physical assessment.
Yeah, right. It's all based on the assessment. But so other than that, there's nothing that we require that is like an operating reserve. We don't require any type of operating reserve or initial operating deficit reserve, nothing, like only replace reserve. Now, separately, if you're doing tax credits, your tax credit investor may impose those type of reserves. But generally, if it's a sort of a simple rehab job and you're just getting FHA and financing or something, that generally there's nothing that you need to do other than do a replacement reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
We've got a written question from Ivory Matthews asking if we have scattered site units that have been vacant for 2 years, can we include these units in a RAD conversion? These units referenced were denied in the previous SAC application.
Right. So yes. So I presume these units are we're still receiving subsidy. And one of the first things you'd want to do is go to our RAD inventory assessment tool or the RAD application, because both documents would include the same information, and pull up the project number and see if those projects, this particular scattered site, was sort of included in the in what we recognize as receiving funding in 2012. And as long as it was, then yeah, you can convert this. And if it turns out it wasn't, still sort of get on the phone or contact Will Levy or myself, Greg Byrne, and we'll walk through with you to sort of get this thing back on the funded. But very likely the project was receiving funding in 2012. Yes, you can convert those units, and you actually have more flexibility than other PHAs with respect to the one-for-one replacement. Under RAD, we require more or less people to give us back. If it's a 100-unit project, we want 100 units back with a 5% float or a 5% gimme. But one of the exceptions we allow in terms of you don't have to do one-for-one replacement is if the units have been vacant for more than 2 years. And so if you had 100 scattered sites and you were having a real hard time making the numbers work, but you'd be making it easier for you if you only had to convert 75 as opposed to 100 and sell the other 25 and use the sale proceeds to dump into the 75, then you could do that. So because the units have been vacant for more than 2 years, there's not a one-for-one requirement like there is for units that have been occupied. Hope that helps.
A question from Tom Davis.
Tom, you got another question?
Yeah, this is a context of a new construction RAD replacement. Okay. And the concern came up about the definition of temporary versus permanent relocation, and we fully understand that there's no permanent relocation triggered by RAD, but okay, also have in the back of our minds HUD's framework that anything longer than a year is considered permanent.
Right. So it's really while sometimes in the world of URA officers, relocation officers, that they often think, well, something a year, more than a year, is permanent. For our programmatic purposes, there's no problem with that. So let me see if I can walk this through. If it really is going to take a year for this family to be, for this project to be renovated, right, and all, and you're going to put the family up in some appropriate quarters during that period, that's fine. If that's what it takes, okay, that's what it takes. And what actually happens is, let's say what you found was you found a unit in public housing to move them to during that next 18 months, that essentially for the URA people, they're thrilled because if the family decides to stay in that public housing unit, they've been given comparable assisted housing, but they always can come back and decide to go to the replacement unit that's built. So there's no one-year limitation with respect to this so-called temporary relocation.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
We've got a written question about EPCs. For PHAs with existing EPCs and projects converting to RAD, how does the EPC financing and ongoing monitoring work?
So energy performance contracts, so PHAs may have, there's a project they want to convert to RAD. A few years ago, they entered into a contract with an EPC to capture the savings for the energy performance measures, and HUD either froze their utility funding to help to finance that, or gave them something we call it an add-on to their subsidy to pay for the financing. So they say they convert that project to RAD. The second part of the question I'm going to answer first, which is that what happens to, normally if you had not converted to RAD, there's this requirement every year for a management and verification report to make sure that those energy savings are still materializing. Well, you convert to RAD, you're out of the public housing program, so that M&V report and all the apparatus around that go away. You no longer have to submit anymore anything because you've left the public housing program, and that's tethered to the public housing program. So you're out. the first part of the question is, well, I had a loan, and I was sort of making a loan payment to either the EPC or to some lender. What do I do with that? Well, you have to satisfy that obligation, and you either continue to make payments to the EPC provider or the lender for that, or when you take out a new loan for the property or recapitalize the property, then take out hopefully a sufficient amount that you can pay down that EPC loan and just get out of it altogether. In which case, from then on out, any energy savings that you have been able to generate accrue to the project entirely. So either way, in terms of that obligation, you either continue to pay the EPC loan, or you can pay it off, provided your EPC loan documents allow you to for early prepayment.
So we have another written question from Holly Knight. How does small PHAs that convert all units using tax credits support the ex-director's salary?
Right. So yeah, this is a great issue. So I'm a small PHA. I got 150 units, and I really feel as if my project needs to go after 4% credits in order to raise the amount of capital I need, because I need really $25,000 a unit in rehab, but I can only generate in the first mortgage maybe 10 or 15, and I think that if I go after the 4% credits, I've run the numbers, and it will give me enough to make this work. So the project will really be better off. But what do I do as the PHA director? I got a salary I got to pay. If I'm converting this project, am I giving away all my revenue stream to the development entity, and how am I going to pay for myself? So this is a big issue, and PHAs need to think this through. In some cases, some PHAs have said, well, this is fine and dandy because now that I'm not managing the project, I really don't, and I was looking to retire for several years. Now the chance for me to sort of phase out, and really we need a much more limited role here in terms of the central office, because I don't have as much duties to do anymore. In other cases, the PHA may decide that I want to sort of continue on and have a more expanded role, but you're going to have to end up negotiating with your development partner what you want out of the deal. And whether you're negotiating cash flow, which doesn't always pan out, but you may look to keep the cash flow, or you may look to generate as part of the development fee, in which case that development fee might pay into you over several years, in which case you're paying for your overhead or whatever. But this is, so I don't have an answer to sort of say that this is the thing, what to do in all circumstances, but just for PHAs to really think this through. That particularly the smaller the PHA and the more that you sort of your recapitalization strategy is using tax credits, which means employing a developer, are you going to continue to have a role as a manager of that project, as a partial owner of that project, or are you really turning over those functions to the development entity, and therefore you have less coming back to you? Another thing that some PHAs are doing land leases or seller take-back financing that allows them to still have a source of revenue to pay for certain central office costs. But it's a really tricky issue to work through.
We've got a question again from the Camden Housing Authority.
All right, Camden?
Yes, it's Chuck Valentine again. This extends the prior question about EPCs.
Okay.
If you have multiple sites in the EPC, you have to work with your lender then, and with HUD, somehow to figure out what add-on portion of ACC subsidy you're still going to get if you're only taking one amp and converting it.
Yep.
Correct?
Yeah, particularly when you're doing, I don't want to say exclusively add-on subsidy, but add-on's a little bit more problematic than frozen rolling base.
Right, we have add-on here.
Yeah, so it's just one that it's one of those things that if you have that situation, it requires more sort of advanced planning, and we've cut our teeth on a couple deals already where PHAs applied for RAD and had an add-on subsidy for multiple projects, but they were only converting one project to RAD. So, to the extent that you want to have some sort of early conversations, well before you apply or convert, then we can help broker and convene those meetings with the program office here at headquarters.
And also the capital fund financing, where you secure bonds against future capital fund contributions.
Yep.
If you have a particular AMP now that was under that program and you're converting it, you're going to have to do the same thing, either pay off that portion of that bond for that site, or make a decision that, if HUD will allow you, make a decision that you could use the capital fund contributions from the other sites to help pay your financing for that site that you've now converted. Is that possible?
So yeah, like the EPC, that you have to figure it out, and you have to. The ideal is that you're able to get the lender to agree for you to pay down the loan, which was associated with that particular project, and so the regulations have always been that if you're dropping your inventory, you can't drop your, once you do a CFFP, you can't drop your inventory by more than 5% because it affects the debt coverage ratio. But we're happy to waive that for RAD. More problematic is whether the lender incorporated that same provision in their loan documents, and some lenders have been easier to work with that than others. So this is another one like EPCs. If you have a CFFP loan and you're thinking about RAD, then send us an email here. And we have someone from our team, a couple of members from our team, who've worked closely with both the outfit that bought the Fannie Mae loans, Dreadnought, but also some others. So we've cut our teeth on a bunch of transactions already where we've worked with the lenders on these CFFP loans. So I would have, to expedite things, I'd have a conversation with whoever it is that you've got a CFFP loan with first, find out what the situation is, find out how amenable they are or not, and then reach out to us, and we'll pledge to work with you to get them that sort of loan negotiated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have another written question. If a PHA is beneath its fair clause limit, can it acquire additional units, add them to its public housing portfolio, and convert them under RAD?
So yes, you can. There's both a timing issue and a capacity issue. The capacity is, we have 60,000 units to award. If your units that you're building under fair clause, it's going to be another 12 months before those units get built, then chances are we will have awarded all 60,000 units, and you may not be able to sort of come in. Now, we certainly expect that we're going to reach our 60,000 unit cap before this calendar year is out, and we've asked the Congress to increase the cap. The Senate appropriation bill currently has a provision increasing it to 120,000. So we hope that we would never have to sort of worry about the cap, but in the meantime we do. So yes, you could do that, just subject to availability of CHAP award authority. Tom, go ahead with another one.
So I have a pair of questions related to the de minimis
Sure.
disposition component.
Okay.
So in a scenario where there is a 200-unit RAD, a 200-unit property, and the housing authority has a handful of single-family and duplex properties scattered around the city, imagine that they have 7 of these units around and about. So that would be under the 200, under the 5% of the 200.
Yep.
How would we approach it if the AMP included the 204 of the 7, but the 3 other ones were in a different AMP?
Move those 3 to this project.
Can we include those 3 others in a single RAD application?
Sure.
Okay,
we might need you to do So okay, let's talk this through. So we certainly allow people to pull units from other projects to make sort of a new RAD project, right? So that's permissible.
Yep.
So essentially, we'd be extending that sort of conceptual arrangement to this, where what you're saying is, well, really, my site, I have two sites today. One's 200, and the other is 150. But I want to take 200 from one and 3 from the other to make a 203. But in that 203, I'm going to drop 10 units because that's the de minimis. So yes, you could do that.
And do we need to submit an amp by amp application so that one application is just the 3 units, or do we override the unit counts in the application form?
So I'm looking here across our sort of conference table at Cheryl Tenninga, who among other things leads our application team, and if she feels like we have an answer, sometimes, Tom, some of these anomalies we just never thought about. Oh my gosh, that's how we would do it. So I'm going to ask if she thinks. If not, then we'll get back to you by email and phone to kind of work it out. Cheryl, do you think there's an immediate answer to it? Or?
Yeah, I think if they're going to combine units from 2 different amps to create their RAD property or RAD conversion, the RAD amp, RAD, you do need to submit an application for each of the projects that's contributing to that. So you'd have to do 2 separate applications.
Right.
Okay.
So
yeah.
We definitely want to, for tracking and control purposes, we need to know where something came from. So it seems odd that you would do a full application for 3 units, but
3 de minimis units, but yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
3 de minimis units, right? So we might be able to, if this plan still proceeds, to get on the phone and find a way to sort of expedite what you have to include in that particular application for the 3 units.
Yeah, it would be minimal.
Yeah, it would be minimal.
Very, very.
Yeah. We certainly wouldn't ask for a pro forma.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
And what is the timing of when the de minimis units get released from the declaration of trust? And
just like everything else, at the
it's at the closing of the associated transaction.
Yep.
Okay. And is the de minimis counted on a phase-by-phase basis, or can it be counted on a portfolio basis?
It could be counted on a project basis. So you can't, if you're going to come in with a portfolio and then and say, listen, I want to apply the ones from those latter projects to this first one. We wouldn't allow that because, again, we're not sure that those later ones ever will get done.
Got it. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
But you're thinking creatively, Tom. Thanks. Do we have another question?
Yeah, Brian Gates.
Brian.
How you doing, Greg? Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I jumped in a little bit late. I was on a call with our attorney about our RAD deal.
Good.
So we're submitting an application with multiple phases. Phase 1 is going to be closed in about 2 months or so. It's 107 units. 37 will be replaced back on site with RAD units. If we demolish, so we're planning on submitting and then demolishing and putting the 37 back on site. What happens to the other 70?
Okay, so again, the original site is how many?
107.
107. And it's all occupied today?
Today, yes.
Okay, and so you want to convert all 107 to 107 RAD. Even though you're going to put them different places, you want all 107 to be converted to RAD, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so you're putting, how many are you moving elsewhere?
They all have tenant protection vouchers.
They all today have tenant protection vouchers?
Actually, yesterday they got them.
Yesterday, okay. So this is not to get everyone else's hopes up. These are, we sort of drew a line in the sand saying when people apply to RAD, you get either to apply for RAD and you don't get tenant protection vouchers, or PHAs can decide to go separately through the SAC and do the normal demo dispo application process, but we don't give extras. But for those projects that had already come in and received tenant protection vouchers, we're not holding you, we're not penalizing you, so you can still convert to RAD. So the fact that even though you've already received tenant protection vouchers. So in your case, Brian, you're saying, so you received the tenant protection vouchers, but you're going to convert to RAD, you're going to move some units off site. But I've lost the question again now. What's the question?
The question was, it was my understanding, I had a discussion that there was something relative to you could not demolish the units before you had your financing in place. And the question is it's not going to be in place before the future phases financing is ready, but the units will be demolished.
So yeah, generally, if you're coming into RAD, forget the fact that this is a project that already received tenant protection vouchers and received SAC approval, right?
Uh-huh.
So normally we would say you can't jump the gun. We'll let you demolish the units once we approve your financing plan, because otherwise we'd be allowing you to go ahead with something in which we're no guarantee yet that you have hard replacement units on the back end. That is still generally the case. I think, Brian, this might be just again a case-specific example that let's try to get you and me and Will Levy on the call, in the next 24 hours and just walk it through, if that's okay.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
So we have another written question just regarding the portfolio awards. Still unclear if your application this year needs to be 50% of your amps, 50% of your units, or 50% of discrete properties.
So it's really 50% of whatever you call a project. So if, like in the very first example, someone started with 3 amps, but that amp is actually going to end up being 2 projects, then those 2 projects satisfy, because at the end of the day, how many projects you're going to have? So you'll have 4 projects. So those 2 satisfy the 50% requirement for portfolio conversion. So hope that answers it for you.
But if you were to submit just one application for the 1 amp with the 2 projects, that would change that.
Right. You've got to give us 2 applications.
Yep.
You have to give us 2 applications for that first amp that you're showing you're breaking it apart. Lou Danzico?
Yes, I'm here. I apologize. I joined late, and I'm sure you answered my written questions, which I'll read in the documents. But my question is, I'm a fee management agent, and we operate a 236 that has RAP in Section 8. We need to do some moderate rehabilitation of the units, and wondering if the RAD program is the right program for that, considering that the nonprofit owner wants to basically continue on with the same type of service to very low-income individuals. And of course, in the 236, there would be MIR tenants and even some market tenants.
Yep. So, Lou, for your property, it really depends. So, if you've got 2 options because you're a mod rehab owner. One is what we call the second component under RAD, in which case your project, because you're mod rehab, like most mod rehabs, your contract expires every year and renews on an annual basis. So you could let the contract expire. Then the families who are in there would get tenant protection vouchers, and you could project-base those vouchers if you like project-based vouchers. Some owners like project-based vouchers and some don't. So you could do it, and it would be whatever the rents are, the comparable market rents for that property, not exceeding 1/10 of the FMR. So you could do that, or you could convert under the first component and say, what I want to do is I want to convert to multifamily Section 8. But the difference with that is, even though you would be able to you'd be in the multifamily world, you'd be converting at whatever the current funding we give you today. That there would be no additional funding. That sometimes the PBVs or the tenant protection vouchers are, depending on what market you're in, might be a higher level of funding, but you wouldn't be able to get anything more. You'd get what you get today, but you'd get what you aren't able to today. As mod rehab owners, because of these 1-year renewal contracts, it's very difficult for them to get long-term financing or to go out and get tax credits. So it really depends on that, your own sort of how you run the numbers for that project. Can the current funding, can you support long-term debt that would take care of the capital needs that you need for that project?
I understand. And a totally unrelated question, listening to all the Housing Authority discussion, I'm a member of IREM, and IREM has long encouraged us to get involved with public housing authorities with regard to management of their properties.
Yep.
Does this program provide any additional incentives for PHA, public housing authorities, from working with fee management agents? Is there any better reason now for them to talk with us?
So the fact that sort of more agencies are looking to make their numbers pencil out, a number of them are saying, you know, it just so happens that my cost structure is higher than what a lot of other fee agents are, and in order for me to reach the level of rehab I want to reach, I got to find a way to get these costs down. And some PHAs have chosen through RAD to say, I'm not going to manage the properties anymore. I'm going to bring in a fee agent. So there's no requirement for us to do that. We're not forcing anybody to do it, but some PHAs on their own have decided that now is a good time for them to get out of the management business, and that they're still serving their mission, which is meeting the housing needs, affordable housing needs of low-income families. It's just they don't have to manage the assets anymore. So it's all sort of on a case-by-case basis. But our sense is that, yes, there's more PHAs doing private management today through RAD than they were doing prior. But there's nothing that's necessarily required of it.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay, sure. We have Eric Olson. Hello, Eric.
Hi, this is Eric Olson. I have a client who wants to increase the density on an existing public housing site by building additional units, perhaps tax credit units or maybe even market units on some of the vacant land at the site. But they're not ready to do that yet, and it'll take years to pull that together. So they're wondering if doing RAD now will make it easier or harder to get an approval from HUD later to release some of that excess land. Do you have any view on that?
Sure. So one of the nice things about RAD is as long as you give us back the units that you had, you know, in terms of replace the units, you get the land and you get to do what you want to do with it. So if I have a 100-unit property and it's sitting on a ton of land, I can, under RAD, convert those units, and let's say all I'm doing is rehabbing them right now, and we will give you that property, including all the land. And if down the road you find a way to bring in some money to add to the site, you don't have to go to public housing to get its approval. There's only this one provision in the HAP that essentially says you can't convey or transfer title to this property without our approval. And that's really there mostly to make sure that no one builds a racetrack on the site or a liquor store or something like that. But if what you're trying to do is expand affordable housing opportunities, then you could assume that approval from us to allow you to use that land for that purpose would be forthcoming. The other alternative you could do is at conversion, you could parcel out the land. So you have this 100-unit property, let's say it's 10 acres, and on 2 of the acres is the high-rise, and the other 8 acres is vacant land. And you want to cut out of your hair on day one. Well, again, we would release the entire site to you because you've made us whole with 100. You had 100 units before. You got 100 units after conversion. But what you would do is you would split up the land on day one and say, HUD, you're giving me the authority. You're letting go of the entire property. I'm actually putting the HAP on the 2 acres, and the other 8 acres I'm just going to own as the PHA free and outright, and then do whatever you want with it down the road. And as long as we felt that the property was not at risk because of that, we'd be fine.
Thanks.
Does that answer it for you, Eric?
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Sure. Maria or Camden, New Jersey, we got another question for you.
Yes, this is for a multi-phase submission.
Okay.
We had one of our developments. We're going to do 3 phases. Because of your last conversation, it made me think of this. If we did 2 rental phases, public housing, and we're required to do 100% unit replacement, a 3rd phase of off-site housing will help replace those units that were originally on-site. Could we use a piece of land to do a mixed finance deal where that parcel is used for commercial activity, or do we have to build all the units first before that could even be considered?
I think somehow I missed. Run it by me again. I missed some part of that. Go ahead. Sorry, can't do it again.
There's 3 phases.
Yep.
Two of the phases are rental residential, and the third phase is commercial.
Okay.
But we're going to use the land, the existing public housing development site, for one rental phase and a commercial phase. And the second rental phase will be off-site. Can we do the first phase of rental first and then do the second? Can we sell the land, if we get approval under RAD, since it's no longer public housing, to sell it for commercial, and then subsequently do the off-site rental at a later date?
So we kind of, if you're doing a phased site, that we sort of give you the authority kind of by phases. So we, you say you're going to build, you're going to replace 40 units. Here's a chap for, or here's an award, or here's a HAP for 40 units. I'm trying to think why I'm not getting this.
Well, you said that earlier.
Yep.
That you're allowed to submit a multi-phase application.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so that's a given. So if we submit a multi-phase application, but 2 are residential phases and 1's a commercial phase.
Yeah.
Normally, it's difficult to convert public housing land to commercial, but if we get a RAD approval for that multi-phase application, we'll do one rental phase on site, 1 commercial phase on site, and then the subsequent rental phase off site, but it'll be after we dispose of public housing land for a commercial purpose. Are we allowed to do that?
Yeah, I'm as long as we the last phase of units, are those units still staying as public housing until you give us the financing plan?
It probably would.
As long as that's okay, that's the catch. We don't want to release any units, allow you to sort of do something with the site unless we know we're going to get something back. So if you're asking for release of the first part of the site, and that first part of the site has 40 units, and you can build commercial on that first part of the site, as long as you give us back 40 units, we don't care what you do with the commercial. And then we release the second part of the site when you show us financing to that matches. So
okay.
I think we're okay, but this is one where we're, again, happy to just spend a few moments on the phone with you if you end up kind of writing up a little quick narrative of it or do a little chart, and we'll quickly walk it through with you and see if it works, okay?
And I think you'll have to think about relocation or
what
happens to the residents as you go through the phases, because you wouldn't want to be in a phase and not have a place for the residents. So if you're going to be building a replacement housing with one of the phases, I'm not too sure how the mechanics of that work based on what you said. It's almost how you stage the 3.
And this is a question I have relevant to multi-phase applications where relocation is a component. Are you still, like the old, because we've done a lot of Hope 6 mixed finance here at Camden, are you allowed to, and in the past what we used to do is just go ahead, relocate everybody at the entire site, then give them replacement housing through Section 8. Are we still allowed to do that, where we're going to get a tenant-based Section 8 voucher for those residents to move them along?
Remember I said earlier on, under RAD, you don't get to do RAD and get tenant protection vouchers. So you've got to manage the relocation on your own. You're not getting any additional resources. You can use the subsidy that we're giving you to this project during construction, because the subsidy will still flow, so you're not having to. So you're getting some funds there you can pay for relocation, or you can move them into other public housing, or you can go to your own voucher program and give people vouchers. You can use any one of those sources you want for relocation, but you're not getting in RAD, in addition to the conversion authority, additional tenant protection vouchers.
So once and you can't use public housing. Can you use public housing funds for the tenant relocation after you get the award of RAD?
Yeah, you can move them into public housing.
No, I mean, can you use public housing funds? to pay for relocation.
For those families, no. No, because
Okay.
yeah. So, but again, just map this out and then just get on the phone with us on some other time.
Okay.
What do we have here? We have a written question. Go ahead, Leanne.
Written question. What is HUD's definition of property?
So what you have to start with is that public housing projects, properties, whatever, are defined today by AMPs, Asset Management Project. And there's roughly 7,300 of them across the country, or 1.1, 1.2 million units. So that's how we track projects in public housing today. PHAs have designated an assemblage of units into asset management projects, and that's how we do it. So that's our unit of measurement. We start with that. What you convert does not have to be that. It can be any portion of that or any combination of that plus units somewhere else, as long as what you're converting is a manageable, marketable entity. We're happy with that. So you can split units out of existing amps. You can combine them with other units. If whatever makes sense is fine with us. But if you do that, if you break them off from different properties, you'll end up submitting applications showing that it's coming in from different projects. But you can combine, recombine all you want, as long as what you're at the end of the day is a manageable, marketable entity. Go ahead, Leanne. Another question?
Yeah, another written question. If we have an application for a property that is currently designated elderly, of which we would plan to demo and construct new units, would there be any requirement that the replacement units also be elderly?
No. So there is no requirement under RAD for you to replicate the bedroom distribution or the designation that exists for the property. That's up to you, but also be aware that all RAD projects go through an FHEO review process. So FHEO sometimes can have concerns if a community is simply dumping family units in exchange for senior units, if there's a large demand for family units in the place, or if it looks as if it's there's some racial sort of basis behind the decision or something. But other than that, there's nothing that we say that you can't change the bedroom distributions. So yes, you could do that.
And you need to figure out the replacement,
Yeah, what are you going to do with those families?
Families that, if they have to go somewhere, they won't be going in the RAD property.
Right, if those 100 units are occupied today, then you have to give them a place to live in the new site, or they have to voluntarily agree not to come back to the new site.
We have a question on replacement housing factor funds. If a PHA anticipates receiving future allocations of RHF funds, can I include the RHF fund commitment in my RAD deal, even though I've not received an ACC agreement for the 2014 RHF funds? Right.
So if you've received it for 2012 or 13 or 11, great. It means it's on our books, and we can easily incorporate it. If you're about to get it in the 2014, we'll also do sort of a back office thing to make sure that, yes, you can include that in the deal, and we will work with you, even though it didn't show up in our 2012 database, to do it. So yes.
All right. A question on the annual plan. So what must an MTW PHA include in its annual plan in regards to RAD, aside from the amendment requirements of Attachment 1D?
I'm going to look to Cheryl, see if she knows the annual plan specifics.
Yeah, but the MTW agencies would have to include everything that, and I'm trying to remember which one is 1D, but basically 1D was designed to capture all of the information you would need to include in your plan. So you could be using Attachment 1D.
It should be included in Attachment 1D. It's not. Go ahead and send an email directly to Cheryl Teninga.
Yeah. I think that covers everything.
Yeah.
Another question, what has been the experience of continuing pilot agreements with local municipalities under RAD?
So what we found is that the majority of PHAs are continuing with their pilot. Pilot actually goes away as far as a programmatic requirement. Pilot is unique to the public housing program. It stands for payment in lieu of taxes. And in exchange for receiving a public housing program, then local governments agree to these sort of reduced tax payments. So PHAs, it's no longer a program requirement. What you have to do is you defer to or default to whatever your state enabling legislation says about our public assets owned by public housing, property owned by public housing authorities, are they exempt from local taxes? And in nearly almost every state in the United States, property owned by a PHA is exempt from taxes. A lot of PHAs, even though if they convert to Section 8, wouldn't have to make a pilot payment. They could be completely exempt. Many PHAs, to maintain cordial local relationships, have talked with their local governments and said, well, I'll tell you what, when I convert, rather than not paying anything, I'm going to continue with a pilot payment in sort of good faith. That's up to you. When PHAs convert under RAD to low-income housing tax credits, what most of them tend to do is they tend to lease the land to the tax credit partnership, and that keeps the land exempt from real estate taxes. And that's sort of the vehicle they use. But most financial advisors and tax credit sort of developers and whatnot have access to appropriate legal counsel when you're thinking about that to get the best advice you can on how to handle it in your state.
Our next written question is from Tracy Cross. She asks, if a PHA submits multiple applications, is there still a requirement that the PHA must identify priority among the applications? No,
there's no longer, because we're first come, first served, that you just submit your applications, and anybody who likely submits, certainly anybody who submits this month is not going to, we're not running up against the cap yet. We do expect later this year to run up against the cap, so there's no need for you to identify a priority. Okay, that's the written. We're going to go back to see if there's any more oral ones. Nope. Oh, here we go. Eric, go ahead. You have another question?
Hi. On replacement housing factor funds, the future RHF, the housing authority is going to get for, not for RAD units. I understand RAD doesn't trigger RHF, but
yep.
Previously disposed units are getting RHF. I think you've indicated that that could be added to the RAD contract rent effectively, those future RHF payments.
Yep.
And I wanted to be sure I knew whether that's just the first 5-year increment of RHF or both the first and second.
Both increments. And so the example I typically give, because I think I remember the numbers, is let's say I'm a PHA, then my RHF increment is $100,000 a year, and I've already received 3 years of it, and that I've already received, I can just plow into the deal like capital funds as sort of a development source of funding. But the remaining 7 years that I haven't got yet, that would be 7 years of $100,000 a year would be $700,000. So if I were converting to PBRA and I wanted to use those RHF funds, what we would do is take that sort of future income stream of $700,000 over the next 7 years. We would divide by 20 years, which is the length of the HAP contract. We would divide by 100 units, the number of units at the site you're converting, and then divide by 12 months, and we'd come up with a PUM. And essentially, that example would add to about a $29 bump up in the contract rent. So if the contract rent previously had been $600, the contract rent would now be $629, and that would be the government would be indifferent about giving you $29 a month in added rent for that project, or giving the agency 7 more years of $100,000 a year. So that's how we would take the future income stream for the RHF and put it into the project.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Tom, you have another question?
Yeah, in the conversation about de minimis, I forgot to check on one question. If the de minimis number comes to like 5.75, can you round up, or is it only rounding down?
Yeah, you can round up.
Okay, and then another question, just on sort of timing of fee issues. If a project converts, let's say this November, would it get an OCAF adjustment in January, or does it have to wait a year before the first OCAF adjustment?
So no one gets an OCAF in 2013. So we use the 2012 levels, and your first OCAF occurs in 2014. And so then the question you're asking me, is it at the anniversary date or is it at the first of the year? And boy, we had this discussion the other day in-house, and now I forget. So if you'll, I apologize. I will I'll certainly send an email back to you, Tom, but for others, we'll make sure to answer this question at the top of the hour next time.
And one last question, when does the administrative fee for a PBV start?
So the administrative fee would be the first of the next calendar year.
Okay. Great.
Great. Thanks, Tom. So looks like we're out of oral questions, and then written we're done.
We have one follow-up on pre-development costs.
Okay, sure.
So they'd like to know, how does the HUD approval happen for pre-development costs over $100,000? Is it the field office or HUD?
Well, they're both HUD, so it's it would be the local field office that you'd ask for, and they would, if you've already been assigned a project, they'd probably check with the transaction manager for it, but it would be the local field office. Okay, so I think it looks like we've gotten most of the questions due today. Thanks again. Another sort of both robust list of attendees and a set of questions. We're thrilled that there's much interest as we're seeing in this program, and we will do another live Q&A session next Thursday. We'll send out an invite beforehand with whatever special topic we choose for next week. Thanks, everybody.